Welcome to Geek Therapy Radio. You've got your mental curator, Johnny Hemberger. It is with somewhat of a heavy heart that I start the show this week by announcing that this is the final broadcast of Geek Therapy Radio on KPRC 950 AM. It's not broadcast anywhere else. I'm not going to any other radio station or anywhere outside of iHeart, anything like that. This is it. This is the final episode of Geek Therapy Radio on KPRC 950 AM. It's the final broadcast. I started Geek Therapy Radio. There was a few years of groundwork before my first air date in 2017. A lot of rejection at the idea, at the desire to go on the air, and it was not a negative thing. It was what it amounted to was proving trust. You know, you have to prove your trust, you have to show the radio station, you have to show that you can protect the license for the FCC, and it was about establishing trust. And at that time, I hadn't had enough trust built up in me yet, and it just took a few years of doing that, a few years of proving myself, few years of practicing and proving the concept and all that. And I did little sound bites for Live Nation for the concert series. I was doing little Phil content. I think it was called Tech Bite back then. And eventually I got the green light from the powers that be, and Geek Therapy Radio was born in 2017 for the inaugural broadcast. And I could not be more thankful to the folks at iHeart. So Brian Erickson, Ramon Robles, Michael Berry's producers, Michael Berry, all the other hosts that I worked with when I ran the board, when I was a board operator for 740 KTRH, I worked very closely with Michael Berry and Ramon and all them over there, and they all helped me get my sea legs. They were mentors. Ramon was the program director of KPRC 950 AM. Back then, he was the one who helped give the final green light for Geek Therapy Radio, and I could not be more thankful to him and everybody else at the radio station, Kenny Webster, all my other stablemates here, Jesse Kelly. They've all been great, even though if you've listened to Geek Therapy Radio long enough, you know that I've disagreed, I guess you could say, with kind of the way some of the shows operate. It's because I don't want to say that, and I didn't want to make this final broadcast like that, like I have any sort of beef with any of my other hosts around here. That's not the case at all. I'm just saying there's political differences, and it's not necessarily that I am not conservative or not liberal or whatever it is. It's nothing like that. It's this kind of being in this radical middle it makes you look around at the landscape at all different types of radio talk show across the political spectrum, and just like, man, I don't personally agree with the way some things are done, but that doesn't mean that I disagree with the people, or that I don't like the people, that I don't like Michael Berry or Jesse Kelly or Kenny Webster or anything. No, not like anything like that at all. In fact, I'll use this opportunity to say that this is the last episode of Geek Therapy Radio to air on KPRC 950 AM, but this is not the last you're hearing from me. Matter of fact, the podcast will continue. The podcast will continue to be hosted on the iHeart radio network. You can also, obviously subscribe to it through Spotify, Apple Podcasts, all the other audio platforms, podcast platforms. So the podcast, Geek Therapy Radio, is still going to go on as a podcast that lives under the KPRC umbrella digitally. This is just the last broadcast. But you still may hear me on KPRC 950 AM from time to time with fill content. They are allowing me to continue to provide fill content, little snippets of the podcast to kind of promote the podcast. So you'll be listening to a commercial break, and you may hear me come on during the commercial break with some little cool geek tidbit, some sort of cool geek news or whatever. Maybe a minute long, 30 seconds long, 15 seconds long, maybe up to 2 minutes long. Who knows? You'll hear me from time to time here and there throughout the day on KPRC 950 AM with little chunks of content from the podcast to promote the podcast. And you also might hear me conceivably come on other shows. I don't want to name drop the shows necessarily. You heard all the ones that I mentioned, but I don't want to put them under the gun or anything like that to feel like there's no obligation to have me on for anything. But let's say theoretically, Kenny Webster or Jesse Kelly is talking about AI or robots or some sort of geek news, some video game controversy, whatever. You may hear me come on for there, or SpaceX is in the news or whatever going on like that. So it is conceivable that you might hear me come on as a guest to other shows. Most likely you're going to hear me come on. I can totally see it happening that I join Michael Garfield a lot more often, the high-tech Texan, that I come on his show a lot more often. It's conceivable. It's not, again, there's no obligation for Michael to reach out to me or anything like that. But if you do hear me on a radio show, it's going to be in that capacity, basically as a guest, quote unquote, expert in a given kind of geek sciencey field, whatever. So that's how you're going to hear me on KPRC going forward. But the actual hour of Geek Therapy Radio on Saturday and Sundays over the weekend, that's going, I don't know, that's gone. No more hour-long radio shows for me anymore. I don't know what they're going to fill that time with, those hours over the weekend. Probably some infomercials, if I would imagine, if they're, because that's just the way it works. They can start making more money with my time slot, basically, and I would not fault them at all for doing that. I'd encourage them, please fill my hour with something that's going to make more money than Geek Therapy Radio does. That totally, I understand that completely. So I'm keeping my foot in the door. You will hear me still from time to time on this radio station. Probably more often, actually. You might hear me, because you probably hear me throughout the week doing this radio fill, or throughout the week possibly coming on as a guest to other host shows. But I'll explain in the next segment why I've reached this decision, and it was an amicable decision between me and iHeart, me and KPRC. I'll explain that here in the next segment coming up. I also have COVID right now, like really bad COVID. I'm recording my final episode through some massive brain fog. You're listening to Geek Therapy Radio. Don't go anywhere. Welcome to Geek Therapy Radio. You've got your mental curator, Johnny Hemberger. I'm going to start explaining in this segment why this is the last broadcast of Geek Therapy Radio. But before I do that, I will just mention that in true geek form, since this is Geek Therapy Radio, the microphone you're listening to right now, not that it matters greatly on AM radio, you might not be able to tell the difference, but I am recording straight into the microphone built into my ROG Ally. I have the original ROG Ally. I know if y'all have been paying attention, the ROG Ally X has come out. It has the same processor, but you can now put a bigger solid state drive in there, physically bigger. It comes 2280 now instead of the 2230 in the original ROG Ally. But the processor is the same. The AMD, the awesome Ryzen Z1 Extreme is the same thing between this ROG Ally that I'm holding and the new version of the ROG Ally X. That's the same processor. And there's a few other differences. No more, Oculink port on the top for going out to eGPUs. It's now 2 Thunderbolt 4 ports or USB 4 ports. So they've done a little bit with the I/O. Apparently they've fixed the micro SD issue that plagued the original Ally, even though I've not ever run into that issue with my ROG Ally. My SD card has been just fine. So Asus itself is in a bit of hot water regarding warranty issues and an honesty and transparency. I won't get into that too much in this episode because this is the final episode and I'm just explaining why this is the final episode of Geek Therapy Radio. But Yes, in true geek form, I am recording this through the built-in microphone of my gaming handheld. And it doesn't sound that bad. If you want to hear it in full fidelity, you can obviously go grab the podcast, Geek Therapy Radio Podcast, in your favorite podcast player, and you can hear what this actually sounds like. Now, I've zhuzhed it, obviously. I've EQ'd it, and I've added compression for broadcast, and it sounds the best it can. But yeah, you'll be able to hear exactly what I'm talking about if you go subscribe to the Geek Therapy Radio Podcast in the iHeartRadio app, Spotify, Spreaker, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcast, all that good. Not Google Podcast. Google Podcast is gone. You can subscribe to podcasts on YouTube now. You can type Geek Therapy Radio Podcast into YouTube and subscribe to the podcast that way now too, which is really cool. And across all social medias, Geek Therapy Radio, all over social media, Instagram, X, Facebook, aforementioned YouTube. I do have a TikTok, even though I don't keep up with the TikTok as much, but it's all there. Geek Therapy Radio is not going away as a show, as a podcast. The podcast stays. So that's a good segue into explaining why there's no more Geek Therapy Radio broadcast, why this is the final broadcast of Geek Therapy Radio. Well, you're not going to hear the show anymore on KPRC 950 AM. In the first segment I explained, you'll still hear me from time to time, possibly guesting on other shows. You'll still hear some fill content in commercial breaks to promote Geek Therapy Radio podcast. But as far as, having 2 hours over the weekend of Geek Therapy Radio, that's going away. It was an amicable decision between me and the powers that be at iHeart, at KPRC 950. They're still my friends. I still consider them very close. They're still allowing me to keep my foot in the radio door here, keep my presence around, which might wind up that you start hearing me more often, because if you hear the fill content or hear me guesting on other shows, you're going to hear that during more prime time hours. So you might actually start hearing more of my voice throughout the week. It could be a blessing in disguise. But the reason why the radio show is going away as a radio show, it's just a matter of life getting so busy that I couldn't record new episodes each week. It became difficult to continue to record a fresh episode every week. Work obligations, and I just had my second child, and having a 3-year-old, an infant, and work obligations, it got to be too much. Too many plates spinning, too many plates to keep spinning. And I didn't want any of them to crash. So I said, you know what? I'm going to take the obligation of recording a new radio show each week off the table. I'm not making any money off of Geek Therapy Radio. I don't make a single penny off of Geek Therapy Radio. If you listen to the show and you hear all the commercials play in between the segments and everything, I don't make a dime of that. That is basically paying for Geek Therapy Radio to be on the air. That's basically covering the cost of airtime, but I myself am not making a dime, and that's kind of part and parcel with the decision to end making a broadcast, is that in order to make the show profitable, it would have two things need to happen. A, you need to toe the line a little bit. I don't mean that in a negative sense, but I've talked about that. I am a kind of a different breed from typical that you might hear across conservative talk radio. Nothing against conservative talk radio. I am not at all saying that that anybody's doing anything wrong or anything like that. It's just I can't, the sponsors are the sponsors, and sponsors want to know that you are aligned with their values 100%. And while that just doesn't sit. I made a decision long ago, which basically shot myself in the foot from making the show profitable, that I was too hung up on sacrificing my values to sell the listener something. Basically, when you take on sponsors, it's just kind of the reality of radio, and it's not a good or a bad thing. It's just what it is. You can't go. You have to plan your content and your subject matter around what's not going to piss your sponsors off. If someone's giving you money to do something and then you talk about something that offends the person giving you money, or worse, really, what kind of affects their market, like if you say something that affects their customer base or reduces their chances of making money or sending people to the shop, then they're not going to want to sponsor you. So I never wanted to have to censor myself. I never wanted to have to think about the sponsor first before I open my mouth. And I'm not saying that that's what every radio host does. Not at all. Not at all. You know that other radio hosts are sitting down with potential clients and they're being honest with them, saying, hey, you can sponsor me, but I'm gonna say what I want to say. If you're cool with that, cool. It's even better if you both line up politically and morally and with all your values. That's just even better. But I don't know. It never, the way to make money in radio never sat really well with me. It was enough of a factor just to make me not pound the pavement and go get sponsors. I did get a few sponsors from time to time. I had Audi for a while. I had Audi Central Houston as a sponsor. It was great. I won't go into details on why that fell through. I will say that it did not fall through because of anything I did, but it was just kind of a shot in the arm. It was a warning of how this industry works. And hey, I guess I can't, I'm not willing to toe the line and play ball like I'm supposed to have a successful radio show or make it financially successful. And again, that's nothing negative. It's nothing bad. It's just, I saw how the sausage is made, and some of it bothered me a little bit, and it was bothered me enough to make me not want to play the game so hard as far as bringing in money and sponsors. And really what it amounts to is just time. You know, I work full time for the Houston Museum of Natural Science, and just the fact of the matter is it doesn't matter what I think about my ethics or taking on sponsors or what that means and censorship. And now I watch what I say because I have sponsors now. It was nothing like that. It's basically just time. I work full time, and I just wouldn't have time to go out and pound the pavement, because when I wasn't working full time, I had to be back home. I have a 3-year-old and an infant, and mommy and I both have COVID, and now I've got pink eye, and all these sorts of things just come up. And it's like, even if I wanted to, I wouldn't have time to go out there and shop the show around to bring on sponsors. So it's totally fine. That's just what it was. That's why there's no more Geek Therapy Radio on the radio. It's just because I just don't have time to record the podcast each week. Maybe I will in the future. More Geek Therapy Radio coming up. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to Geek Therapy Radio. You've got your mental curator, Johnny Hamburger. I apologize if this episode it feels off as I'm recording it a little bit. Not just because this is the final episode of Geek Therapy Radio, the final broadcast of Geek Therapy Radio, but I am recording this final episode just battling through the molasses of brain fog. My wife and I both have terrible COVID right now. Losing our taste, losing our smell. I'm losing my mind. I don't think you can catch it through the radio. But anyways, yes, what a wonderful coincidence that I'm recording the final episode of Geek Therapy Radio broadcast, battling through the brain fog of COVID. I feel like I'm, so I know a lot of you know this, know what this feeling is. You ever feel like you're watching a movie of yourself? You're going through the motions of the day, but you feel like you're just watching everything third person, like it's a friggin' video game or something. Like you're playing God of War, except it's you. Kratos is you. You just got a camera. Lakitu is behind you with the Mario 64 camera, just watching you run around. You feel like you're watching yourself in a movie. Usually you only feel that way when you're really stoned. But I am not stoned. I just have COVID, and it's coming with the strong brain fog, and everything I'm saying, everything I'm doing, everything I'm operating with my body seems like it's doing it through molasses right now. I never knew what brain fog was because I'm typically pretty sharp cognitively, but now I fully understand what people are talking about with COVID brain fog, because I have that right now. Anyways, this is the final episode of Geek Therapy Radio, and again, to recap very quickly, it's an amicable decision between me and iHeart and all the powers that be at KPRC 950, who I hold them all very and still in very high esteem, high regard, high respect. All the other hosts, KPRC and KTRH, hold them in very high regard, high respect. They help me get where I am today. They help me give me advice on starting my radio show and what to talk about. Let me talk. Here's a little anecdote. This is a good way to. This would be a good story to tell on the final broadcast of Geek Therapy Radio. A long time ago, 6, 7, 5, 10 years ago maybe, I was one of the producers in the board op, call screener, for the Michael Berry Show. This was back, if y'all can remember far enough, before Michael Berry, I believe it was Chris Baker at the drive time. That's when I started at KTRH in 2009. Michael Berry was a young blood, city councilman. You listen to Michael Berry enough, you know his whole background. But I was there, ground floor, bringing his show to the masses in Houston, and then eventually nationally in syndication. Michael Berry Show has absolutely skyrocketed in popularity over the past 10 years. And I was there in the ground floor helping get that going, especially get the Michael Berry Show podcast out to as many people as possible. There's ideas that I implemented in the podcast and that I brought to the higher ups to help make the podcast grow even further. One of the implementations I made was, hey, we have to take a little more care in how we upload the podcast and what we upload and what we say about it. It can't just be Michael Berry Show, November 11th, 2012. It can't just be that. It has to be, the titles have to be snappy and grabby. The descriptions have to have plenty of SEO, search engine optimization, in there, so that as many people can find the Michael Berry Show podcast as possible who have never heard the radio show. So somebody up in Minnesota somewhere who has never heard the Michael Berry Show, when you title the podcasts correctly for search engine optimization and you leave a snappy headline in there in a nice description, you'll get the attention of people who otherwise have not heard of you. And then they've heard of you and now they're subscribed to you. So those are implementations that I made in the podcast early on to help the broadcast reach more people. And therefore, even reaching more people, it helps the show, the terrestrial radio show, grow better, because someone hears it on the podcast. Oh, I want that. And then they call KTRH or iHeart and say, I want them to syndicate on my channel. The podcast helps with all that. And I'm happy that I was able to rejigger zhuzh the podcast and how we upload Michael Berry Show podcast to help it reach all the more people. I think it reaches millions of people now. It's insane. But early on, before I started Geek Therapy Radio, my bugaboo, my main concern, I didn't understand how I would be able to talk for 10 minutes at a time. Like, how do you do that? Michael, I would ask him, Michael, how do you talk for an entire segment at a time? Like, just a stream of consciousness, 10 minutes per segment, give or take, whatever. How do you do that? And what I learned was, I'll just tell more about Michael's response later, but what I learned was, obviously, how do you stop talking at 10 minutes? That quickly became the real issue. And Michael told me this. He's like, the issue isn't going to be how do you talk for 10 minutes. The issue is going to be the clock and how do you stop? How do you wrap it up? The trick, the goal is really, and the expertise comes in where Ramon is on the other side of the glass, wiggling his finger, saying, wrap it up, 30 seconds, starting to play that butt music in. How do you wrap up your thought in a decent way to segue into the next segment, to keep listeners through the commercial break and keep them listening so that they're here for the next segment start? That's where the expertise comes, is hitting your post naturally and stop talking. It's not how do you talk for 10 minutes, it's stopping talking. That's the real thing. But one of the best pieces of advice that Michael Berry gave me early on when I was starting with Geek Therapy Radio, he may not even remember this, But he called it like, it was like the cheeseburger analogy, the hamburger analogy. He said, if you don't know what to talk about, or you're vamping, or you don't know how do you fill the time, how do you engage the listener? He said, describe a cheeseburger. You describe how juicy the beef patty is. You describe how it sizzles when it's broiled, the fat dripping down into the coals or into the flames, and the fire kissing the beef patty and searing in all the spices and flavors. Then you talk about the bun and how soft yet crunchy the toasted bun is. Talk about the coloration, the nice soft golden color of the bun, the sesame seeds dotting the bun, how the bun has a little bit of butter on it, and when you bite into it, you get the softness of the bun and then a little bit of the crunch of the toasted part of the bun, and then you bite into the cheese, which melts in your mouth, and it fills your stomach with such warmth and joy, and the lettuce just is crispy, and you chew on it, and it kind of breaks in your mouth, and you can feel the explosion of water trapped inside the lettuce leaf fill your mouth with the other juices of the hamburger and the cheese. And basically, I'm not doing maybe a great job of it, but describe a hamburger. That's how you connect with people, as you start describing. It's the radio. They can't see what you're doing. They can't see what you have. So you have to describe, quote unquote, the hamburger. That helps with the stream of consciousness. That helps fill the time between segments. And you know what? If you listen to the Michael Berry Show, for any disagreement that I have with Michael Berry over politics or whatever, and you will all agree with me on this. There's no way any of you would disagree with me on this. I'm that confident in this next statement. The best of Michael Berry, when Michael Berry is at his absolute perfection, and what Michael Berry does better than probably any other radio host that I've ever heard, even better than Rush Limbaugh. I know that's a big thing to say here, is he's so great at digging into people's lives, making you really care and fascinated about what people do for a living. I will tune in the Michael Berry Show from time to time, and I find myself listening for hours when he has a caller. I mean, he might be on a completely other subject. He might be talking about Kamala Harris or something that's going on, but he'll have a caller call in, say, what do you do for a living, Bob? Oh, I'm a truck driver. Oh, how much was your rig? Do you pay off your rig? Did it? And he goes into all the nuance of Bob's life as a truck driver. Has nothing to do with politics, has nothing to do with sensationalism, has everything to do with human connection and making you feel that you understand Bob better, because Michael Berry did such an excellent job at extracting the threads and yarns of truck driver Bob's life. That is when Michael Berry is at his best, and that is that is what I take away from my relationship with Michael Berry, the mentorship that he had for me over the years, is he's just an expert at talking to people and getting people to talk. Having Bob the truck driver explain what kind of truck he has. Oh, he had transmission problem. How much did the transmission cost? Oh, yeah. Where did you take it? What was the problem with it, dude? It's fascinating. That is so much better, in my opinion, than Hunter Biden's laptop. That's just me. Oh, I like hearing about truck driver Bob and truck driver Bob's life than I care about hearing Hunter Biden's laptop. But whatever. That's to me, that's like perfect radio, is Michael Berry talking to truck driver Bob about truck driving and the life that comes along with it. I'm just waxing here. Waxing poetically on the last broadcast of Geek Therapy Radio. Got the last commercial break coming up. Stick with me. I am your mental curator, Johnny Hemberger. There is one more segment of Geek Therapy Radio coming up. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to the final segment ever of Geek Therapy Radio on KPRC 950 AM. This broadcast is coming to an end. Geek Therapy Radio on the radio is coming to the end, and this is it. It is with a heavy heart that I announce that I've been with y'all for 7 years, and you have been with me for 7 years. I've built the podcast side of Geek Therapy Radio up nicely, in my opinion. It's not millions. It's not Joe Rogan. It's not a pimple on the butt of the Michael Berry podcast that toot my own horn, I helped build up. But it is my own show. It is my own growth on my own podcast. It's hundreds of hundred thousand something, whatever, downloads now, whatever. At one point, it was a lot hotter than it is now when my only focus in life was Geek Therapy Radio podcast. When I started Geek Therapy Radio, I had just been divorced. There's another, let's get real for a minute here in the last segment of Geek Therapy Radio. In 2017, I needed a win. I needed a win in my life, and it was my dream to have my own radio show. I come from a broadcasting background. My dad and my uncles, all broadcasters, who, for those of you who don't know, my father, God rest his soul, he died in 2013 in October. My father was Alan Hemberger. You might remember him from Channel 13, Marvin Zindler, Bob Allen, all those folks at Brandon, Dave Ward, Sheriff Fryer, who's still over on KTRH, our sister station. But yeah, my father was Alan Hemberger, and it was important to me that I carry a torch. You know, it's funny that my dad said, please don't get into radio. There's no more money in mass communications. Please pick something stable that you know you will make a living at. But I got into radio anyways. So anyways, in 2017, I had been divorced in 2016. I don't know how much detail I want to go into with the parameters around the divorce. I will just say that I was blindsided by it. I will just say it like that. But I needed a win. And so I wasn't married anymore. I was going through that trauma of divorce. And I felt like it sure would be nice to have a win in my life. So I had been dipping my toes in the broadcast waters. I had been working at iHeart since 2009, back when it was Clear Channel, building the trust, showing them that you can trust me with the FCC license, which I've demonstrated fully. But I wanted my own radio show, and we're coming after the divorce. I needed a win. So eventually, the show was greenlit. Geek Therapy Radio was greenlit in spring of 2017. I remember going out to my car after meeting with Brian Erickson and Ramon Robles, and they gave me the green light thumbs up. Ramon was the PD of KPRC at that time. Callum Reed would later take over his spot as program director for KPRC 950. Went out to my car after getting the green light finally after years, and this was, almost a year after my divorce, and it was a wonderful praise God moment. I was singing in the car. I was cheering for the first time in a long time. I went out to my car cheering. I had a win. And at the beginning, Geek Therapy Radio was my only thing. It was the only thing that I was sinking all of my energy into in my life. I wasn't married anymore. I didn't have kids with my ex-wife, thank God. I didn't have property with my ex-wife. It was, for as terrible the circumstances were, financially and kind of like as far as strings attached, their silver lining was there wasn't any financial things tying together, and there was no strings attached. So that, like kids and property, anything like that, not even any vehicles in each other's names, nothing like that. If we had a bank account in each other's name, and that was easy to separate. But all my energy was going into Geek Therapy Radio. All my energy was going into this radio show and building it up and figuring out what it was actually going to be, what it was going to be about, what I was going to talk about, how I was going to relate to the audience. And all the energy went into that. At one point, I was doing 5 podcasts per week, if not 6 podcasts per week. I was doing the radio show and then 5 more podcasts per week for Geek Therapy Radio. Life changes a lot in 7 years. Fast forward 2024 right now. I've got a 3.5-year-old boy. My wife just gave birth to our son. He is 1 month old as of recording right now. I've got an infant and a kid. Full-time job at the Houston Museum of Natural Science. I no longer board op at KTRH anymore. I was full-time board op at KTRH. What a ride that was. Ike. No, I wasn't here for Ike, actually. Sorry. Hurricanes, Harvey, standing at the KTRH helm for countless hours, like 16 hours a day, at least during Harvey. And I was sleeping under a desk it was in the old building, and I would go down to the sales floor and I would sleep under I would sleep under Rob Reese's desk. That's not real, Rob. I did not sleep under your desk, but I did go down to the sales office, and I was sleeping under desks during Harvey for a few hours at a time before I'd get back up and go man the helm at KTRH again during Harvey. It was wild. Oh, the PTSD, man. I don't want to use that term lightly, but emergency alerts, I can't actually do the sounds because that's it's a heavy fines. You can lose your license. But those annoying severe thunderstorm alerts that kind of interrupt Astros games or the Michael Berry show. There was the machine that handles emergency alerts during Harvey basically burst into flames. It was just constantly printing, constantly firing off those tones. We had to call the EAS and WS and FCC and just tell them, hey, we cannot keep broadcast. There's no physical way for us to keep broadcasting these warnings. Y'all are piling up. There's 12 warnings coming in at a time every 30 seconds. We cannot break into a program 30 times every 30 seconds to air each new alert. Just people know it's raining. The lake is in their house. They're swimming on their second floor. They know that it's raining. Please give us a little leeway here. Don't hold us over the flames. Don't fine us if we don't play every emergency alert because we're in the hurricane right now. We can't break away. It's too many. It's too many. We can't do it. People get it. We can't do it. So we just need a little grace here with airing the emergency alerts, which they allowed, of course, and it was understandable. But that was part of my career at iHeart and at KTRH. It all paved the way for Geek Therapy Radio. I did have Geek Therapy Radio at the time. I think I just started. I had just recently, so it's 2017. Harvey was 2017. So I had just started Geek Therapy Radio in spring of 2017. And then for my birthday, if y'all remember, August 25th is my birthday. That's when Harvey hit. So I had my show for like 2 or 3 months, maybe 3 or 4 months before Harvey. And it was an absolute, I did an episode. I remember I recorded something for YouTube, for my Geek Therapy Radio YouTube. Hey, check out where I'm sleeping during Harvey. We got the food. Check out the food and the vending machines that were being provided. And it was a terrible experience for the entire city. And it was a harrowing experience for the person manning the helm at KTRH during the storm, which was me. If you remember, me and a couple other board ops, because a lot of other board ops were just, they could not swim to work to come help. They needed to be with their families, and who would blame them? I wasn't married anymore. I was just basically sleeping at the radio station. So anyways, Geek Therapy Radio is basically me rambling about different things, trying to connect with you over our passions, our hobbies, and our interests. So I'm going to end the show one final time. By the way, Geek Therapy Radio podcast will still continue, just not every week. You'll get it when you get it. Geek Therapy Radio podcast and all of your podcast apps. But let me leave you with this one final time. Please listen to me. Turn your radio up all the way. I want you to listen to this and sear it into your brains if it's the only thing you remember from my radio show. Are you ready? You are worthy of love. You are worthy of giving love. You are worthy of receiving love. And you are worthy of your own self-respect. Lean into your geek thing, and it'll treat you right. Thank you so much for joining me over the past 7 years on the radio. It has been my absolute pleasure. Take care, y'all.